Hello everybody, and welcome to the Clark County Public Library program Afterschool Posse. My name is Miss Amanda, and today I'll be reading you a book and showing you a craft that you can make at home. Today we're reading The Camping Trip That Changed America, Theodore Roosevelt, John Muir, and Our National Parks by Barb Rosenstock, illustrated by Mordicai Gerstein, with permission from Penguin Random House. Teedy and Johnny didn't have much in common, but they shared a love of the outdoors. They both loved a good story too, and that was enough to change America. Theodore Roosevelt's family had called him Teedy since he was a boy. He grew up in one of the oldest, richest families in New York City. Teedy was short and brawny, with a fashionable mustache. He loved the outdoors, hunting, fishing, and riding horses. He attended law school before becoming a politician. Theodore Roosevelt became the youngest president of the United States and lived with his wife and 6 children in the White House in Washington, D.C. John Muir's family had called him Johnny since he was a boy. He grew up in the Midwest, the son of poor immigrant farmers. Johnny was tall, thin, and quiet, with shaggy hair that curled into a long beard. He loved the outdoors, studying, sketching, and writing about plants. He hiked the American wilderness alone and wrote about his travels. John Muir became a world-famous naturalist and protector of wild places, with a special love for the Yosemite wilderness near his farmhouse in California. The White House, March 1903. Teedy settled into his favorite chair. He loved to end the day reading. Tonight he chose a book by John Muir. Muir's adventures in California's Sierra Mountains sounded just about perfect to the busy president. It was strange then when Muir ended his story by asking for help for trees. He said the wild forests were vanishing. He called on the government to save them. The president thought about those mountain forests for a long time. Most people, even his own experts, thought America had so much wilderness it couldn't ever be used up. But was John Muir right? Could the forests disappear? How could the government help? As president, Teedy needed answers. Roosevelt wrote John Muir a letter. The president was planning a long trip to the western states. He asked John Muir to take him camping in California's Yosemite wilderness at the end of the trip. If America's forests needed help, the president wanted to see those trees for himself. Roosevelt's train stopped in cities and towns along its route toward Yosemite. At each stop, bands played, officials gave speeches, and people crowded the platform to catch a glimpse of the popular president the newspapers nicknamed Teddy. May 15, 1903. The train reached the end of the line in the small town of Raymond, California, about 30 miles outside the Yosemite wilderness. When he found men sending his baggage to the best hotel in town, Roosevelt shouted, "By George, I'm going camping. Pack me one small sack." Along with a crowd of officials, townspeople, newspapermen, and photographers, John Muir waited to meet the president. Teedy shook Johnny's hand. I've enjoyed your stories, Muir. The president spoke a few words to the crowd. Then he joined Muir in a waiting stagecoach. They bumped along the road to Yosemite, another stop, more speeches. Muir was growing impatient. Didn't the president want to see the wilderness? Then Roosevelt's voice boomed. Enough pictures, folks. I'd like to see the rest of this country in peace. The president sent his men ahead to set up camp. Leaving the shocked crowd behind, T.D. and Johnny rode off alone. I feel like a runaway schoolboy, T.D. laughed as his horse galloped along. They stopped near a family of giant sequoias in the Mariposa Grove. Surrounded by the trees of this ancient forest, for once, T.D. was quiet. When he looked up, he couldn't see the treetops. The sequoias soared straight to the heavens. These trees grew up when the Egyptians built the pyramids, said Johnny. They are the largest living things on Earth. They never stop growing unless they are cut down. That night, under the branches of a towering sequoia called the Grizzly Giant, T.D. lay on the 40 thick wool blankets his men prepared. Johnny made a bed from some branches and wrapped himself in an old cloth from his sack. He told T.D. the funny story of meeting his first bear. I once saw a bear in a meadow. Now, bears are shy creatures, so I jumped out from behind a tree just to see him run away. The bear looks up. I ran toward him shouting and waving. I finally stopped, or I would have run right into him. The bear rose up, put his claws on a log between us, and glared. I'd made a big mistake about shy bears. I had to stand perfectly still for hours, or I would have been his dinner. Finally, the bear rambled off, checking back over his hind end to make sure I stayed put. That bear and I were both scared and embarrassed, but I tell you, it was the bear that had the better manners. T.D. laughed. Was it a grizzly bear, he asked. Johnny shook his head. The only grizzly left in Yosemite today is this old tree. Hunters shot the last bear a few years ago. Under the trees, T.D. and Johnny slept. May 16, 1903. The next day, T.D. and Johnny rode higher into the mountains, trading stories the way friends do. As the horses plowed through the drifts of snow, they reached a peak called Glacier Point. Glaciers carved this whole valley, said Johnny, spreading his arms. He lay down on a slab of granite and inched along on his back to show how a massive river of slow-moving ice carved the rock beneath them millions of years ago. They camped high above the valley floor. Johnny made the president a bed of branches, and they settled near the fire for warmth. Johnny began his story. This whole continent is a great garden. Before the beginning of time, ancient seas covered the land, churning the rocks into soil. As the seas dried, volcanoes sculpted mountains and valleys. Glaciers carved rivers and created plains. Trees and flowers grew into forests and meadows. Wild birds and beasts filled the land. Everywhere nature sang her melody. Can you hear it? My children should see this place, said T.D. I hope it is still here for them, said Johnny. Under the trees, T.D. and Johnny slept. May 17, 1903. Overnight, a storm blew in, spreading 5 inches of fresh snow. T.D. and Johnny woke under a coverlet of white flakes. They shook themselves off like 2 old grizzly bears. "Bully," said T.D., stretching. "What a glorious day." On horseback, Muir and Roosevelt rode down into the famous Yosemite Valley. The granite formations towered above them. They passed the sheared cliff of Half Dome and the fierce face of El Capitan rising from the valley floor. On their last night together, John Muir talked to the president about life in the wilderness. People were destroying wild land to make money from it. Ranchers cleared forests, prospectors mined gold, and companies planned to build hotels and shops throughout the valley. There was no one to stop them. "If they keep building, the wilderness won't last another 10 years, said Muir. "How can I help?" asked the president. "Keep it wild," Muir said, "and protect it forever." Together, T.D. and Johnny imagined a different future for America. What if everyone owned the wilderness? What if both rich and poor could spend time out in the open? What if we could save the forests for all the children to come? America's Wilderness, 1903 and beyond. T.D. left Johnny in Yosemite and headed back home. His time in the forest turned the outdoor-loving president into one of nature's fiercest protectors. Roosevelt pushed Congress to pass laws saving the wilderness. He failed at first, but that didn't stop him. He created national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and national forests. With John Muir's spirit as his guide, Theodore Roosevelt saved more wild land than any president in history. T.D. and Johnny never spent any time together again. T.D. traveled the world, but called the night of the snowstorm the one day of my life that I will always remember with pleasure. Johnny felt the same. He wrote that he fairly fell in love with the president. They exchanged personal letters for the rest of their lives. John Muir lies under the incense cedar trees he planted near his home in Martinez, California. Theodore Roosevelt lies beneath the sugar maples in the Roosevelt family plot in Oyster Bay, New York. For all time, under the trees, T.D. and Johnny sleep, and their shared spirit protects our wilderness forever. The end. Now I'll show you a craft that you can make at home. I've made a painting of these beautiful birch trees. You'll need a piece of cardboard and a piece of paper that you'll glue to that cardboard. Then you'll take some yarn and wrap it around your paper to create these tree shapes. Then you'll take a paintbrush and paint it these different colors. And after you take off the yarn, it will look like this. Thanks for listening. Bye.